I'm going to actually ask Caroline Hendry to come up for a few minutes as we're getting the second panel set up here. Because I wanted Caroline to take a moment to talk to reporters in the room about EWA and some of the kind of exciting changes that are happening in that institution. Between the Hechinger Institute, New America Foundation, and EWA, I'm hoping that reporters will see that there are a wealth of resources out there that can help you with your stories.
Thanks very much, Lisa. I really appreciate it. I'm Caroline Hendry, Executive Director of EWA. We're based here in Washington, and Lisa was right when she talked about resources. One of the things I'm really proud of at EWA is that we have a really good array of resources on our website specifically about early education. I think that's probably one of our best articulated sections of our web resources, and I would really encourage people to come and use those. At the same time, another really important resource we have is our Listserv for reporters. So on deadline, you can throw questions out to your colleagues and get answers, leads to on deadline resources and sources and studies, and that's just a great number of reporters find that really, really valuable. We also have a public editor who is there to work, for customized help, to work with you to edit your stories, to give you advice about the research that you're doing, writing and researching, coaching, very, very much just available to you on the phone or via email. And then I want to mention something that's coming up. We're very excited that we just received generous funding for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading to expand the amount of programming that we have in at our national seminar, which is coming up in early April, just a little bit more than a month, April 7th through 9th. It's in New Orleans, and we are able to build out the focus that we have now on early education. Sarah mentioned the importance of integrating discussion of early education into broader discussions of education writ large, K-12 and even higher ed, and we already have planned to do that. Sarah herself, for example, is moderating the panel that we're having on the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, with her expertise on early ed. And we have other experts talking about the big funding cliff, for example, that Superintendent Wiest, I know, is grappling with, that education is facing, and we're having experts on that panel who focus on early ed. But we're also having dedicated panels just on early education. So, panels on reading, on the importance of reading on grade level by grade 3 and beyond, that kind of thing. We're going to be doing a site visit to an early education center, and so I would really encourage you all to come join us. It's a really vibrant couple of days, and I hope you'll get involved in EWA, because we're really a thriving community of practice, and we're only as good as the members of our community. And I'm thrilled to say that since I came on board in June, our membership has more than doubled. So I'm really pleased, and I hope you'll join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's see our second panel with Linda and Deborah and Ralph. Is going to have some materials that you may be wanting to distribute or pass out. So we'll take a minute for them to be seated here. While they're doing that, I wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Caroline just said about the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. We're fortunate today to have that campaign sponsoring the luncheon that we'll be having in a few hours here. They also helped with those USB drives that you may all have received when you came in. And on those little memory sticks are many, many documents that can be of use to you, including Sarah's paper on New Jersey, which was mentioned a couple times in the last panel. So you'll find that whole paper there. It's also available on the New America website. Sarah wrote that when she was here at New America. And there's also some material from NAESP on that memory stick as well. So should be a lot of information just even within that little stick there that can help you get some good story ideas going. So I'm really excited about this next panel, and I'm very grateful to the amazing speakers that we'll have here for this. In today's world, children who cannot read well will struggle throughout school. They won't be able to complete their homework. They won't be able to participate in discussions. They won't be able to do the research needed to write papers or analyze what's happening in the world. They will most likely struggle to graduate from high school, let alone college. They will struggle to get good, stable jobs. This is a key piece of our vitality as a country. So today we have 4 experts in the field of literacy to help us pinpoint what needs to be done to help struggling readers, but also just to make sure that children who are at the very early and emergent stages of literacy are getting what they need. We'll have Deborah Spitz from the Department of Education, who will be able to talk a little bit about the Striving Readers Program and other initiatives that she's been involved in at the federal level. Ralph Smith with Casey Foundation, and who's also helping to lead the effort on the campaign for grade level reading, which is it today, Ralph, that it's, or tomorrow that we're launching?
We just ended 16 and a half minutes ago.
That's right. He's been doing the pre-head of launch with the funders was the past couple of days. Bob Slavin is here from Success for All, which was one of the winners of the Investing in Innovation, or I3 grants. And Linda Espinosa, who is a national figure when it comes to understanding dual language learners and what they need, and has been a professor at the University of Missouri, but also does a lot of consulting and work around the country with various preschool and elementary school programs. So according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and many of you in the room may know these statistics, but I think it bears repeating them. More than 2/3 of today's 4th graders are not proficient readers. That means that they are not reading at grade level. More than 2/3. They are behind. For minority kids, African Americans and Hispanics, the numbers are worse. 83 and 84% are not reading at grade level. You look back over time, and in the NAEP scores, we do have many decades of scores now, or several decades of scores. Those reading scores have not budged much. We've had decades of research on how to teach children to read and new programs to try to put a focus on literacy. And yet, it feels like we're treading water here. We're not really getting anywhere. So what I wanted to do was present one question to the panel to kind of get things started. And I'd like each of you to answer this in turn. And I may start with you, Deborah, and then just go down the table here. And I was wondering if you can tell me this. Why hasn't there been more progress? And what needs to change?
Okay, well, to start with, I work in the, I manage the group of programs that includes some programs that are no longer funded, such as Reading First and Early Reading First. And our new program is Striving Readers, and that was appropriated in the 2010 Appropriations Act. It's almost sort of an interim program because it's not part of ESEA, and we don't know what's going to happen, of course, with reauthorization. So we also it's sort of a scary week because it's the week that the budgets may be determined. So we're waiting to find out about funding for this program. But one thing I'll start with is the department has done a lot of work on different literacy programs, but in terms of NAEP scores, now programs like Reading First and Early Reading First were never large enough to actually maybe statistically change NAEP scores. It's unfortunate that NAEP scores haven't increased as more than they have. The department hopes to infuse literacy more into some of the larger programs like Title I, like Race to the Top, School Improvement Grants, 21st Century Community Learning Centers. The small programs that, like, say, Early Reading First and Reading First, that actually went to really the highest need schools might not have statistically been able to change NAEP scores anyway, because they didn't go out to many schools. They went out to really high need schools. Our new program, I will talk a little bit briefly about sort of what we're building on, what we've learned from Reading First and Early Reading First and other programs, and what's changing with this new program that I think is really important. There are things that Reading First and Early Reading First have taught us and did well in terms of maintaining a focus on quality professional development, coaching and mentoring, the use of data, having teachers really sharing data, using assessments well, and not just outcome assessments, when we're talking about young children, really talking about screening and progress monitoring and informal types of assessments like Yvonne talked about versus sort of, outcome assessments, but really using that data and using evidence-based practices. So those are the things that we build on. What makes this new program, Striving Readers, very different is it's a birth to grade 12 program. And one of the things we heard over and over again with Reading First is sort of, well, what about pre-K? And then what about grade 4? We had teachers that felt like things were going really well in K-3 in their schools, but then, what, so we just don't do this with the kids in grade 4, or, we're not working with our preschools. And we know, and you just heard a lot about, how critical that birth to pre-K age is for reading. So and we did address that age group with Early Reading First, but again, Early Reading First was a small program. It went out to we funded about, say, several hundred programs across the country, but that's not changing nationwide practice. And that also didn't work at the state level, it worked at the local level. So what's different about this program is it's really about states thinking comprehensively, birth to grade 12, about literacy. And that, we don't think that's going to be easy. Most state departments of education they certainly haven't dealt with the birth to, say, age 3. Some of them have pre-K programs in their state departments of ed. Many of the states have to work with another agency to work on the pre-K part of learning. So this is a big challenge for states. And so that's one thing, and then really just emphasizing this sort of thinking at the state level about literacy as a continuum and starting all the way from birth. And really emphasizing the difficult transition points, that we know about pre-K to kindergarten, grades 3 to 4, middle school to high school. Those transition points are really critical to maintaining any gains that are being made. So really looking at those transition points. And we plan on providing a lot of technical assistance around those points. Taking sort of a broader view of literacy, so since we're talking about birth to grade 12, we're talking about pre-literacy, we're talking about writing and pre-writing skills, we're talking about use of oral language, we're talking about vocabulary, serving children with many different needs, English language learners, so really emphasizing kind of a broader view of literacy than, I know many people feel that Reading First took. And also emphasizing kind of working with multiple stakeholders. I'd say that's the other real emphasis of this program. We had a small amount of formula funding that went out to every state. It's actually in 48 states because several states declined it, but it's a very small amount. Most states got $150,000 to build a state literacy team. And those state literacy teams they're in play now. States are developing literacy plans. They've given us draft plans, but they're not sort of ready for prime time yet. But this is a big challenge for them. And states are really working with, and we've urged them to work with many, many different stakeholders on their teams. So, certainly working with Head Start state advisory councils, libraries, the other areas that are really key that state departments of education don't always necessarily work with as well as they might. I will stop there. Thanks.
Rafael, why haven't we made progress in your opinion?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll begin to answer that question if you take back calling me a literacy expert. You put me in the panel with Linda Espinosa and Bob Slavin. We can't do that. No.
You're seeing the bird's eye view.
You can call me a recovering law teacher. There's a lot of things you can call me. Literacy expert is not on the list. This is the why question, why after all this time and all this effort and all this talent, all these programs and initiative, all the money, all the good intentions, and all the good outcomes we report, there's been absolutely no movement on the population level measure. So there's a kind of a mathematical formula that you could make, good intention plus effort plus talent plus programs and even plus outcomes do not add up to impact. It's a fair question. One way to do it is do a little chaos mapping in your communities, right? Take all these programs run by everybody, and we've sort of created a little chaos map because you've got some media efforts, you've got school district efforts, you've got the philanthropic efforts, and what you've got is a jumble of programs and initiatives which, quite frankly, are too fragmented, too disorganized, generally too underfunded, providing a dosage that's too low and touches that are too few and not continuous. You got philanthropy being a sort of an equal opportunity funder when it comes to quality. You fund equally things that have no quality, things that got no evidence, things that got some evidence, and things that have great evidence. There may be something to say for that, but it's not doesn't take you down the road toward impact. And this chaotic approach that we've had for so long has allowed us to feel good because we're doing something. It's even allowed some of us to claim outcomes. But let me say something about outcomes. Because you say, how could you have outcomes with no impact? If you have a program for kids 0 to 3, and you evaluate that program, it's almost, even if you just take the placebo effect, that program will do better for the kids who are in it than for the kids who are not. And you take 3 to 5 and you have a program, same thing. And you take K to 3 and you have a program, same thing. The problem is they're not the same kids. So no kid gets the full sequence. And so by the time you reach the 3rd grade, we're all sort of saying, well, we spent all this money on all these programs, we got all these good outcomes. What happened? Fact of the matter is the current approach we have isn't workable except by accident, and the accidents aren't happening all that often. And if we don't, if we don't do something dramatically different, we can't expect to see anything different. And if all we do is more of what we're doing, what we'll get is more of what we have, and we've got to decide whether that's good enough.
There's a lot to untangle there. I'll stop you for a minute. We'll come back to it. Bob.
Okay.
And by the way, Bob falls on the good quality side of this.
Oh, well, thank you.
The real high quality side of this.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, take a moment to tell us, I'm sure you would, about what the I3 grant means to Success for All in terms of the fact that, as many of you in the room know, the I3 grants were designed at least to be rewarding high quality programs, those with evidence of outcomes.
Okay. Well, first let me say what what it is, and
Yes,
then
yes.
I'll
Thank you.
say what
Yeah.
what I3 means to it. I work at Johns Hopkins University, and in the late 80s we designed a program called Success for All that was designed to use everything that was known from research to try to make sure that kids were going to be successful from the beginning of their time in school, from pre-kindergarten through the elementary grades. The idea of it was really very simple. Just review the research, find out what works, figure out how to make it replicable, how to make sure that all of these elements that we knew worked already could work well together in real schools over real periods of time, and that would work in high poverty schools, in Title I school-wide projects, in which most children are in poverty and qualifying for free lunch. So we began with this many years ago with just a handful of schools in Baltimore. We now work with about 1,000 schools throughout the U.S. and have a great deal of research on showing the outcomes of the program, and I'll just say a little bit more about what it is in a moment. I3 comes along as, I think, one of the most important things that's ever happened in education, or could be, because, and this will astonish you, perhaps, or maybe not, this is the first time in human history, the first time in human history that evidence has mattered in education. It has never happened before. And that's incredible in itself. It's the very first time that in order to get serious funding to scale up a given program, you had to be able to demonstrate that the program had been carefully evaluated in comparison to control groups many times by third parties and so on in order to get the funding at all. And I think that I3 is an illustration of what could happen to, for example, Title I, or to education policy more generally, to begin to make a difference at a national level. Here's the problem as I see it. We know a whole heck of a lot about how to ensure success in reading by third grade. Whole heck of a lot. I don't think there's any area of education research that's as rich in understandings of every stage of how reading is developed, what kinds of approaches are effective, and so on. Problem is, so we know all about the importance of building language and of phonemic awareness and of phonics and fluency. We know about the importance of parent involvement, the importance of eyeglasses and good vision, the importance of good classroom management, about motivation, about grouping, formative assessment, all kinds of things. Whole libraries full of information about not only what kinds of things are necessary, but also what actually works. So how come these things don't change the outcomes on a broad scale? The difficulty is that though we know a great deal about how these things work, and we know individual programs that work very well, these have no impact whatever on our policies. None. If we were to identify the programs and practices that were effective and then said that the purpose of, for example, our $14 billion Title I program is to increase the number of schools that use these things and use them well, use them in the way that we know is necessary, not just in terms of a list of variables, the way the National Reading Panel came out with a list of variables, but really actual programs, and many different programs that people might choose from. And then you expanded the things that work where with fidelity, so that you know and you check, but you know that these things that worked at a small scale, they worked at a moderate scale, they worked at a large scale. Now they're working in even larger dissemination. Then how could you not have an impact nationwide? It's just the same as in any medical field, where you create a new treatment, and initially it only works with 10 patients, or maybe then 100, or maybe then 1,000, but how does it change things throughout the world? It changes things throughout the world because you disseminate it. You find out what works. You find out the conditions under which it works. You find out the kinds of things that it solves, and then you make sure that those things are scaled up and actually make a difference. So Success for All is one example. There are others as well of programs that are there, ready to go. Evaluated many times by many different investigators over long periods of time, found to be very effective. Nothing in it is from outer space. We're talking about teaching teachers good strategies for building children's language, for teaching kids the code, the phonics, for teaching vocabulary, for teaching comprehension, for teaching teachers to do good classroom management, and to involve parents to look into issues like eyeglasses or attendance or kids with social problems or social emotional learning. All of those kinds of things, but put them together into a package that's readily replicable, that adapts to local needs and circumstances. But basically, when you say we're going to take on a Success for All school, then that here's an array of things that happens, and it happens pretty much for sure if the school has bought into it. We require a vote of at least 75% of the school faculty to take it on. So the school faculty has said, we're going to do it. The district has said, all right, give it a try. The principal says, I'm willing to lead it. These things work very often. And if you had them in 30,000 schools, which are the number of Title I school-wide projects in elementary schools, then there's no question that those schools would be performing a lot better, and you would be getting to see a reduction in gaps and an overall improvement in the nation's performance. The other issue that was mentioned in the earlier panel that I wanted to point out has to do with cost effectiveness in this time of difficulties in financing. Success for All has the evidence. Other programs do as well. That there was a University of Wisconsin study that showed that it reduced special education placements to about half, that reduced retentions about in half. These are very, very expensive things that come early, that we don't have to wait to influence the prison budget or the welfare budget. You can make back everything you spent within elementary school itself just by reductions in special education and retentions, as was shown in this University of Wisconsin study and some others as well. So to not do this kind of thing, I think, is policy foolishness, because this is something we can solve. We can't solve everything right now, but by God, we can solve this one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Linda,
I have
yeah.
to follow that. Well, what I want to talk about are the issues in the huge achievement gap between reading for middle class, native English speakers, and English language learners or dual language learners. And if you just look at the data, the NAEP scores, for instance, it's very clear we are not making progress in this arena. I think something like 6% of children identified as English language learners scored at the proficient level in reading in 4th grade on the 2009 NAEP scores. In California, which is a state that I work in quite a bit, we actually 85% of the 3rd graders were below basic levels in English language arts in 2007. So for by whatever measure, high school completion, college enrollment, college completion, etc., reading achievement scores, any academic measure you want to throw out, our children who have been identified as English language learners are not faring very well in our educational system today. So why haven't we made more progress on the issue of English language learners? And what I want to offer to you are 2 reasons. One, the science, the research base, what Bob talked about in terms of knowing an awful lot about how to teach reading and the components of it and the variables. I would say that for English language learners, that research base is much less robust and much less deep. We really don't have a history. Most of, the National Early Literacy Panel, the reading panels, they almost totally focused on native English speakers and deliberately excluded the group of children called English language learners. However, we have learned, I would say, in the last 10 years, our science is starting to catch up. Even though we don't have the same number of studies and the same depth of research, what we have are congruent findings. So even though the research base may not be as complete or as long-lasting, et cetera, I do believe we have enough congruence, enough findings to actually make some recommendations. So I think the first reason is that the research base, we're just starting to discover how it is that teaching children who are not native English speakers to read in English and achieve high on NAEP scores, how we are learning about how to do that is relatively recent. Okay. Secondly, I believe that what we do know about how dual language learners acquire language and achieve high in English, I call it counterintuitive. So the ways that children learn through and with two languages, the ways in which it is unique and different than monolingual English speakers is actually counterintuitive to the ways in which adults think about language development. Most of us in our adult years really remember acquiring a second language through the prism of trying to learn French in high school. You know, trying to learn a second language when you were an adolescent and probably not succeeding at it very well. What we as adults through that prism don't understand is that young children are at a very different period of their life in language learning. And the neuroscientists, the psycholinguists, et cetera, are providing us with information that shows that the human brain is in fact wired to learn language. And that prenatally in the third trimester of pregnancy, as soon as the little ears are formed, babies start to hear and process and imprint the phonology of language. They start to hear and learn and remember. And not just one language, but multiple languages. That the early childhood years are prime years for a child to be exposed to and proficiently learn a second language. Oftentimes when I talk, I do a lot of professional development actually in states across the country, and adults have this idea, particularly for children from low-income backgrounds, that if you expose a child to a second language before a certain age, before 5 or 6 years of age, that this will confuse the child. Actually, that's not true. The longer you wait, the less probability you will have that this child will become proficient in that second language. So in fact, I mean, if there's one principle to keep in mind, it's that babies are better language learners than adults. They can do this, and in fact, they thrive. Babies thrive cognitively and educationally, socially, and in a lot of ways, babies, you thrive through the process of being involved in multiple languages. And we can talk about the neuroscience behind it. But just in case you hadn't learned a second language early on, there is also some evidence that aging brains benefit from learning a second language as well. It has the same sort of neurocognitive advantages as you start to age. It starts to delay those some of us think about the onset of senility as Alzheimer's and stuff like that, but it has the same sort of cognitive benefits as you age as when you're younger. So and one of the main findings, and actually my colleague Bob Slavin's, one of his meta-analyses, but several others, have actually found that an effective way to promote high achievement in reading in English is to activate and strategically use the child's knowledge of the first language. So to capitalize on what the child knows, the child's knowledge of phonology, of grammar, linguistic structures, and their vocabulary, everything that they know. Say they're 3 years of age, they know a lot about language. That as educators, what we have to do is structure the environment so that you capitalize on that knowledge and then explicitly help them apply it as they're learning English. And I can tell you very, very few programs actually have a systematic approach to understanding and applying this scientific research base. So what I see, when I see go out, I mean, it doesn't take even any deep analysis to realize that our policies are confused and contradictory. And in fact, Claude Goldenberg, I mean, just to reinforce what you said, Bob, Claude Goldenberg has a wonderful quote in a recent paper that language education policy seems to proceed largely oblivious to the findings of scientific research. And I would say that's true. That what we do about language, both at the policy level and teachers' everyday practice, is governed by beliefs, and those beliefs are often inaccurate. They're based upon erroneous assumptions about language development in young children.
I could just push on that for a second, Linda, because I want to make sure everyone in the room is thinking about this. So the English-only policies, say, that some states have in place, where, look, we just need
California.
to immerse children in English and they'll pick it up. Are you saying that the research is telling us that that's exactly the opposite of what should be done with young children, to help them learn English?
Yes. that actually, there are some educational findings, actually like time on task, which shows that the more time a child spends on a task, the more likely they are to acquire proficiency in that task, to achieve and learn that task. Actually, around language, the opposite is true. If you immerse a child into an English-only environment without helping to bridge that knowledge from the first language into English, those are the children that are very high risk of never learning to read in English and losing their first language. It's the phenomenon that Kenji Hakuda has talked about in California, which is that in California, the state policies around bilingualism have swung 180 degrees in the last 10 years or so. But anyway, that children often enter our programs, whether they're 3 or whether they're 5, and they have language proficiency in their home language. They know their home language. So what typically happens is they enter knowing one language. They exit the school system, often prematurely, never having become proficient in English and losing their home language. And if you just look at the national evaluations, Head Start Impact Study, the national reporting system, et cetera, when we look at data across the country about what's happening to children's native proficiency in Spanish, that seems to be declining at about the same rate that English is, at the same rate that children are acquiring English. So it seemed, if you just take the big picture, it looks like children are acquiring minimal additional proficiency in English, but not nearly enough to catch up, and they're acquiring that, it looks like, at the expense of their home language.
Let me ask just a data point, too, and then we'll go to some questions here. How many children in this birth through age 8 age group are English language learners in the United States?
How many children birth to 8?
Birth to 8, or maybe you have stats on birth to 6. I'm not sure how the numbers are out there, but just so that reporters have, and I don't know if that's something that's off the top of your head or not, but because I know that immigrant families is a little bit different.
Right. Well, a statistic in 1990, 1 in 20 K-12 students, or about 2 million children, were identified as English language learners. In 1990. Now, in 2009, 5 million, or 1 in 9 children have been identified. So it's been about 150% growth in the last decade or so in the children. And in fact, the children of immigrant families are responsible for the population growth in the country. That if it weren't for those children, our population size would actually be stagnant. We would not be growing at all in this country.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to some of the points that were made earlier, too, by all of you, really, about how hard it is to take what we know in research and scale it up. And given that we have this budget crunch, it's far worse than that, actually, but don't even have the words around it necessarily, how can we possibly scale up what we've kind of learned and what we know? I mean, the I3 grant, for instance, Bob, maybe you can tell us how many more children now will you be able to serve, and is that a tiny sliver still of the number of kids that are in this age group that need help?
Our proposal is to add 1,100 schools, which is about 500,000 kids. So we would be working in a grand total of about 1 million kids by the end of it. But that's not the only. We're not the only program,
right,
and that's not the only mechanism. If you could imagine a situation in which, for example, Title I sent out a memo to every Title I coordinator and every Title I school and every Title I state coordinator, and said it would not disappoint us if you used programs that had strong evidence of effectiveness, everything would change. Everything would change. Title I schools and administrators sniff the wind all the time to want to know what the government is recommending. And just saying that evidence-based practice, that proven programs should be something that you might want to consider with your $14 billion in federal funding that is not threatened even under this current very difficult circumstance. I mean, there will be Title I. It will be quite substantial. There's no question about it. But there's absolutely no history or tradition or mandate to use those funds, much less any number of other kinds of funding sources that already exist and will continue to exist in the worst of circumstances on proven programs, and scale them up so that instead of being outside of the system, sort of permanent innovations out on the edge of the system, they become central to the system.
And well, so that's with I3, and with Title I. Although I know with Title I it gets dicey. I hear what you're saying, but I also know that Title I already it's permissible to use it all the way down, say, to birth, and there are efforts being made within the U.S. Department of Education to make sure that's very clear to districts. And there are those who, within school districts, and maybe this is something that we should ask, Yvonne Brandon and others who are right there within school districts, but there's a lot of pressure to keep their Title I dollars at least at the same level what they're doing, because they're feeling like there's such a there's trimming around the edges of so many other programs for them. So I guess let's just leave the Title I piece there, because I think it's a really fascinating one. We can open some questions up about it. But within the Department of Ed and within Striving Readers, for instance, would you say there is more of a push for evidence-based practice, Deborah? And
absolutely.
With this program, the Striving Readers program that's coming, which is going to be a competition, as I understand it, right? So not every state's going to get the dollars for this. What are you going to be looking for to prove or show that states have a plan based on evidence?
That's a good question. What I can say at this point, we will be having a competition this spring, and we are in the final clearance process of our notice. So that's going to be published very soon, provided we have the funding for it. And evidence-based requirements are going to be a very significant part of that notice. So I can't really go into more specifics than that, but I can also say that everything that we're working on in Striving Readers is really hand in hand with what the department's been proposing around reauthorization, or will propose around reauthorization, which again is a very strong focus on evidence-based practices.
And then lastly, and then we'll open it to questions, Ralph, tell me about what you were saying earlier about how it happens by accident right now. If there's a chance that a child from, say, birth to age 3 gets a really rich language environment, and then maybe gets a good experience in pre-K that builds some emergent literacy skills, and then gets it in K3. You're saying that that's highly unlikely for young children to get today, and how would you fix that?
I think it is highly unlikely that a large number of kids will get the sequence and will have sort of continuity of care and support given the system we have. But let me sort of complicate this a bit, and I don't want to ever take a position against evidence, but I will take a position against silver bullets. When you look at the numbers for low-income kids, it's not just about a reading program. The secretary said this morning, we just had the chance to hear him, we've got to get out of the catch-up business. Because, in fact, too many kids are coming to pre-K already so far behind that pre-K dollars that should be spent on development are being spent in remediation. Kids come to kindergarten so far behind that the dollars that should be spent to keep them on grade level is spent to get them on grade level. We've got a readiness challenge for the youngest kids. We've got an attendance challenge, and we've got a summer learning loss challenge. And because the best program in the world is not going to work for the kids who are not there. And we've got a large number of kids in some cities, up to 20% of the kids who are missing more than 10% of the school year. You don't solve that problem, we're not going to get there. And we know that for low-income kids, they lose ground every summer, and they go back to school in September farther behind than when they left in June. We've got to work on that. So what we've been supporting is a comprehensive effort which says, first of all, schools got to work for all kids, and we've got to get quality teaching for everybody in every setting, every day, and that means you start at home and you go into the formal and informal child care, pre-K, right up to the classroom. But in addition to doing that, you've got to find locally owned community solutions to the readiness gap, to the chronic absence problem, and the summer learning loss problem. Because if we don't do that, those in-school programs won't work. Right. And you've got to have a system of care that takes care of the health and the broad range of family support that we need to get kids ready to attend school every day, achieve every year, and attain over time. Without that interlock system, we then end up with programs that have got good evidence that they could work, and when they don't for kids, because the kids aren't there, people become even more suspicious of evidence. So I want to argue for evidence against silver bullets, and if there's any magic at all, the magic is in the mix of what happens before school, after school, what happens in the classroom, what happens outside the classroom, what happens in the home, and what happens in the community. And we've got to find a more rational system to get that mix than we have right now. So, I'm not sure whether that helps or hurts the argument, but I know it complicates.
Well, I think the connections piece in the third panel will try to get into that as well, other things that surround school for kids. Let's go to some questions now from reporters. I see a hand in the back there, and Maggie will bring up.
Hi, my name is Anjali Shah. Oh, sorry. Hi, my name is Anjali Shah. I'm a freelance journalist, and I also work with, it's a mouthful, I'm sorry, the USC California Endowment Health Journalism Fellowships website, reportingonhealth.org. I did a story a while ago about the UCLA Community School in LAUSD and their new dual language learning programs, and I'm wondering, this is for Professor Espinoza, two things. One, is there any good research or statistics or numbers about outcomes in these kind of very new programs and approaches to second language students with non-English speaking students? And two, like that neighborhood is not just Spanish speaking, but Spanish dialects, Korean, Mandarin, tons of languages. Have there been any good reports or analyses of costs of these kinds of programs and how to recruit teachers with the ability to work in several languages?
Thank you. So the first question was about efficacy studies for dual language programs. Now, your question specifically had to do with some new programs that are going on in UCLA or in the Los Angeles area. Those new programs are probably too young to have been evaluated. But what we do know about children who experience fully dual language, in other words, 50% English, 50% home language, and it's continued for a long time, that those children seem to be the ones that actually thrive and achieve higher in English language achievement measures. So the dual language approach. Let me also just say one other little thing about that children who are native English speakers, because usually these programs contain children who are English language learners and a mix of children who are native English speakers. The children who are native English speakers and in these dual language programs actually learn that second language to fairly decent levels of proficiency, and in no way do they suffer on their English language math, reading, science, social studies, achievement scores, that those children seem to be doing just fine. In addition, they've learned a second language, when they enter early and stay in longer. And if you want to email me later, I can actually send you some of those studies that have looked at that issue, dual language versus early exit or transitional programs, children who come in for 1 year or whatever and then transition into an English program. Those tend to not have as good outcomes for children. Children who go into English-only immersion seem to have the weakest outcomes. So, yeah, we have some stuff, but again, we don't have the same quantity of studies as we do in the areas of reading for monolingual English speakers. But again, like I'm saying, everything's pointing in the same direction. And when you combine it with the neuroscience research, it does start to make scientific, logical sense. As far as how to recruit teachers to work in communities where you have multiple languages and multiple dialects, and more that's the case, where you don't have just a Spanish and an English speaking community, but you have multiple languages. And in many places, running a dual language program is infeasible for lots of reasons. What we've been designing, and actually LAUSD, and these new programs we're starting there, is this thing called the Continuum of Services. So, and the majority of teachers, quite frankly, are monolingual English speakers and have beliefs, and majority of communities have political points of view, which don't always support the science, you know. So what we have, our response to this is to design a continuum of services with varying amounts of home language support, so that the programs, once everybody is agreeing to the basic principles and the basic science, which takes time, takes a lot of PD to just bring a community together around these central issues and achieve a consensus about what is it we want to achieve, and then what are the methods that we're going to use. So a continuum of services, so that all teachers, even monolingual English-speaking teachers, can provide support for home language and explicitly bridge that into English. That's kind of the state of the art, I guess, where we are right now, so that we never say, we're never in a community and in a situation where you have, let's say, 4 languages, 1 monolingual English-speaking teacher, and you say, well, I can't possibly be responsive to those 4 languages, therefore my program's an English-only approach. It doesn't have to be that way. There are ways that we can honor and incorporate the research without abandoning those principles, and without meaning that you have to have a teacher on staff who speaks every one of those languages, because you won't. That's not going to happen in the near future. But we can do these other things, and we're evaluating them. I guess we have a big evaluation plan as well to see, you know, short-term and long-term, what the impacts will be on reading.
Yeah, I mean, there's districts with 45, 60, 100 languages being spoken within them. Let's go to the next question right here.
Hi, I'm Sarah Garland from the Hechinger Report. I would be really interested to hear Bob talk about his study on English only versus transitional programs in the context of what Linda has been talking about with English language learners, and how that fits in, and what your views are on that.
We did a large national randomized evaluation of transitional bilingual education, which is the far more common approach rather than dual language, where we looked at kids who came into kindergarten, spoke Spanish as their dominant language at home, and were randomly assigned to either be taught in English only or to be taught in Spanish to begin with and then transition to English. We followed the kids through 4th grade, and at least as of 4th grade, what we found was that there was no difference in terms of the outcomes, that the kids were very similar in their English performance, they were very similar in their Spanish performance. Both groups had learned English very well, by the way. Both groups, because they were very impoverished schools, also were well below national norms in both languages, but they were at the same level as each other. We did a review of research on this earlier before doing our own study, our own big study, and found that that there was good evidence for the dual language kinds of approaches, but just as Linda was saying, they're very rare and very hard to pull off in a lot of communities. And I think that there is a lot of work necessary to kind of capture what are the things that dual language programs are able to do and make them work in situations in which you may not have the teachers who are fully proficient, you may not have the English proficient kids who are available in the school to make a dual language program, and so on.
So that's great, Bob. And both of these, Linda, the studies that you're mentioning and yours as well, it might be really good to get some of the abstracts or executive summaries out to the group here. I know that I would benefit as well from learning a little bit more about how those work. So thanks for the explanation. Let's take one more question, and then we'll probably need to wrap it up.
Hi, we're going to go with Title I Report and Education Daily. I don't want to belabor this issue, but I too was wondering about the teacher training. If I am a teacher and I don't necessarily know how to speak Spanish or Swahili or the other languages that my students speak, what is the training needed for me to kind of ignore the languages? Their parent involvement, that's an issue that is hard to do. For a lot of school systems, they don't know how to involve parents in that debate. And then the other question that I had for Deborah is, you spoke a little bit about how Reading First was really targeted to the lowest income students, and that it didn't have as much of an impact because it wasn't broader. So if you can talk a little bit about how the effective teaching and learning literacy that's been proposed, how that would be more expansive, and how the Striving Readers program, which is supposed to be consolidated, would fit into that model.
Why don't you go ahead, Deborah, actually, on the Department of Ed, on the questions just about Striving Readers being under that effective teaching and learning umbrella.
Sure. And basically, your first question about the expansiveness of the programs, all three programs, Reading First, Striving Readers, and Effective Teaching and Learning, are designed to be sort of those kind of targeted, competitive type grant programs that are going just to the highest need schools. So they're Striving Readers and Effective Teaching and Learning would both be competitive to states, so they would only go to some states, and then within the states would have competitive subgrants, and the need would be a factor in those subgrants. So again, it's not that these programs don't have impact, but that they might not have impact on the NAEP national level because they'll be serving many fewer schools. So that's actually not going to change with those programs. I think our challenge is always how do we infuse what we know and learn from these programs into larger programs like Title I or like Race to the Top that can really have a national impact. And to address the question about Striving Readers, in the 2012 budget request, Striving Readers would be consolidated. That it and about, I think, 6 or 7 other smaller literacy programs would be consolidated under this Effective Teaching and Learning program that would be, in 2011 budget it was $450 million, and then the 2012 budget that just came out would be $383 million. And that's taking all those programs consolidated, added up, and actually, I believe, $20 million on top of that. So it's a small increase, and that's basically the department considering sort of that we are in really difficult fiscal times, how much we can put towards targeted literacy programs. So the department's idea would be to make these Striving Readers Awards and continue them out, but also, consolidate them under this larger program under a reauthorized Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'd be happy to talk to you more offline too.
On the teacher training question, does anybody want to jump in with that for a few more minutes?
Well, I think the one thing we do know is that at the teacher preparation level in higher education, we cannot assume that teachers are well prepared to teach children who are from diverse backgrounds or English language learners, because from everything we know that topic is, if it's dealt with in a fairly shallow way. So what we do, we have to, for my work, I assume that we're going to have to do a lot of professional development in an in-service way. And one of the things that I try to do is help people relax. I think people feel overwhelmed. They see all these languages and cultures that they know nothing about, and they think that they have to become experts in things that are totally unfamiliar to them. And I don't think that's true. I think I think we can all accomplish an improvement in our practices without asking the impossible of your everyday practicing teacher. So to just kind of relax about it. And the second thing then that I always work on is surfacing beliefs, because until we can really sort of figure out what do we think about a 3-year-old learning a second language when maybe they have some language delays or something, until we kind of surface that and address it in terms of what is the science telling us, then we operate often unconsciously on the basis of these hidden beliefs that lead us in one direction around language interactions with children. And then it's just a slow process, like you would do any other professional development, of modeling and coaching and reinforcing and supporting and all of those things that we have to do, and not expect that overnight, people are going to automatically understand and embrace kind of these principles that lead to revised practices. But, from my experience, I absolutely have confidence that all of our early childhood teachers can do this. And in fact, it will enrich their lives, their programs, and their classrooms. Once you sort of embrace the fact, this is a multilingual, multicultural society we live in, this is our future, and we're going to have to bring it into the classroom one way or another. So that's, I guess, that's great.
This morning, the secretary was asked a question, and the proposal from the floor is, why don't you consider a race to the top type program for schools of education? And he says, we're going to do that. I was surprised there. But quite frankly, that clear affirmative response I found both intriguing and promising, because if that happens, I think it could be an even more dramatic, it could produce even more dramatic results than I3. I think taking on teacher training and teacher development in this country, and taking on the schools of education in this country would really make a real contribution to transforming American public education into something that works for all kids and not just for some. So I made a note to stay tuned on that, because
how much time do we have?
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you, all four of you, very much. There's a lot that I even want to follow up with on you, so I hope that many people in the room, too, feel like they're stimulated by a lot of the questions that came out here today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Just want to, I guess, we'll let you all escape, and we're going to transition now to a presentation by our policy analyst.